I am so excited because today we're talking to Dr. Marisa Franco. She's a New York Times best-selling author of the book Platonic. Wait, can you see it over there? I absolutely love this book. It was such a quick read because I just couldn't put it down. Platonic is about the science of attachment, can help you make and keep friends as an adult. And I found that so interesting. Marisa is a psychologist, a professor, and a speaker, and her work is mainly focused on friendship. Hi, welcome to my little channel.
Hi.
Thank you so much for saying
Thanks so much for having me.
yes to this. Okay, so I just want to jump straight to it, and I wanted to ask you, your book is a lot based on the attachment theory. Before we get into, all the topics that you had, could you explain in a layman's terms what is attachment theory and why do you think it's important?
So attachment theory is basically the idea that we all have this internal template for how we think people will respond to us based on our past experiences. It's important because most of our relationships are ambiguous. People don't tell us, I love you, I hate you. It's often we're trying to read between the lines. So a lot of the times we're relying on this sort of unconscious template to make sense of how someone's perceiving us. Like, I don't hear back from a friend after I text them for a few hours. Do I think they hate me? Do I think they're busy, right? That's an attachment question based off of your past attachment experiences. And the thing about your attachment style is how you interpret reality based on your past experiences then has consequences for how you behave, right? So those people that think they're being rejected when a situation is ambiguous, they then will reject.
Okay.
They then will be like, I'm not going to text this friend anymore because they don't like me because I haven't heard back from them. Whereas a friend that's more secure, someone might be like, oh, let me reach out again to see if they got my text, right? So fundamentally, for those more insecure attachment styles who tend to assume they're being rejected when they don't know for sure, it tends to become a self-fulfilling prophecy because when we feel rejected, we reject.
I love the theory of self-fulfilling prophecy. I learned that when I was in, I think, college, and I always put it to the test, and it always fulfills the prophecy that we, kind of attract. In your book, Platonic, you talk about how friendships are kind of like the underdog of relationships, right? We put our family relationships on a pedestal. We put romantic love on this, it's romanticized on a pedal. Why is it so important to have friends? Just as simple as that.
As I dived into the research, I realized that we've just always needed an entire community to feel whole. There's 3 types of loneliness. Intimate loneliness, which is a desire for a close, intimate relationship, which can be fulfilled by a spouse or a best friend. Relational loneliness, which is a desire for someone as close to you as a friend. And then collective loneliness, which is a desire for a group working toward a common goal. So people, even when people feel like, oh, I have a spouse I'm really close to, they tend to also feel lonely because that's just kind of how we're built and how we're wired as humans. There's also a lot of research on how having a diverse social group can really benefit us. There's research on other significant others. Having people that are significant to us outside of our main partnership can benefit our well-being. Research where people were basically given the common cold virus and were 3 times less likely to contract the cold if they had a diverse social support network. I think one of the reasons why it's so important is because when you're around different people, different parts of yourself come out, different parts of your identity. So when you're only around one person, it's you only experience one piece of yourself. And if my spouse doesn't like bicycling and I do, that part of me is going to wither unless I have a larger community. So it's kind of to feel whole in our very sense of selves, we need different people to bring out all facets.
So it's not enough that we have a partner, we have, let's say, a husband or a wife. We need to make connections outside that relationship.
The other thing that I suggest for really busy people is are there parts of your day that you're doing alone that you could do in community? Is there a time when you work out where you're okay, I could probably do this with someone else, or going to the grocery store, maybe my friends would be open to doing that with me, or even when you're working, could I invite a friend over to co-work once a week? So it's kind of I'm getting connection during the things that I need to do anyway, so I don't need to add in more time to find this connection that I seek.
You know what's funny? So I just gave birth and I find myself wanting to connect with a friend or two because when you're just breastfeeding at home the whole day, you're oh, I I want to talk to someone. So I sent my friend a message and she said, actually, I'm really busy, but do you want to schedule it on a Google Calendar? And I was like, yeah, sure. So we scheduled a catch up and then we put it in our chat group and we're like, hey, we're all going to catch up on this day. If anybody wants to join in and give us some news, just jump on the call. And it turned out to be so great because it was like 5 girl friends of us who were, some were walking, some were at home, some were at work, you know, sneaking out a call. And it just like, we kind of carved out the time to catch up and chit chat. And it just, there's something about talking to a friend and asking about friends' lives that is, I don't know, it curbs loneliness, right? Even though I have my family and I have, let's say, my husband or my kids and stuff, but we found ourselves laughing, reminiscing over certain things and asking each other questions that you don't normally discuss in a relationship. So yeah, I feel like one of the questions what I wanted to ask you was, when you are an adult, why does it seem so hard to make friends? I know in the book you mentioned that as children you have this kind of like unorganized play that keeps happening, and that's how friendships are fostered. But when you become an adult, it's like you have so much judgment, everybody's a bit hesitant. Why is it so hard to make friends as an adult?
Yeah, so I think you're really getting at an answer to that question, which is that as kids, we had the environment that fosters friendship, which is repeated, unplanned interaction, shared vulnerability, according to sociologist Rebecca Adams. So that means I saw people regularly in an informal setting. That was gym, that was recess, that was lunch. And then we move forward to adulthood and we're like, I just thought it would happen like it did when I was in school. And we're not realizing I'm not in school anymore. I'm at work. Maybe I see people every day there. Now it's virtual. It's harder to connect. I'm trying to be professional. I'm not actually being vulnerable. So we just don't inhabit the same environment, which means that we need to adjust our strategy. We can't just wait for friendships to happen organically. Because like I share in Platonic, people who think friendship happens based on luck are lonelier 5 years later, whereas those that see it as something that happens based on effort are less lonely 5 years later.
Okay, so what makes a good friend?
I'll kind of share a story in response to this. I was at a friend's wedding, and one of our mutual friends was there, and I was chatting with her and her husband, and they had gotten married the year before. And he was kind of talking about, well, he had a bachelorette party where basically half his friends didn't show up last minute, and everybody had to pay like $1,000 for like 2 nights stay. And he was talking about how he has a friend in his neighborhood, but his friend's never interested in seeing him. And I thought about, that's not a friend. Like, I think sometimes we confuse good company and a good friend. Good company is someone whose company you enjoy. But that is not a friend. A friend is a commitment to another person. It's, I'm going to show up during your difficult times. It's, I'm going to celebrate your positive moments. It's, I'm going to try to work through issues and stay committed to this relationship. It's, I'm here to try to make your life a little lighter and make you feel like secure, basically. And so I think sometimes, I think the sort of positive vibes only culture, we think that friendship should only be easy and effortless and we shouldn't have to try. It's something that we can kind of pick up and put down. But if you think about friends that way, it's really limiting your ability to form deep and intimate relationships, because when it comes to friendship, what we know from a theory called risk regulation theory, which is typically applied to romantic relationships, but I think it applies to friendship. One of the principles behind the theory is that we decide how much to invest in a relationship based on our likelihood of getting rejected. So if someone's constantly showing you that they're not, they don't respond to you, they're so flaky, even in your bachelor party for one of the most important moments of your life, they're canceling on you last minute, right? That shows you're getting rejected and you're not going to invest as much in that relationship. And so those people that I think really don't put intentionality into their friendships might have less deep friendships because of those behaviors. And I think that that's a real problem, because I think sometimes we think friendships are inferior inherently. Like they're just, you just can't possibly get as close to a friend as like a spouse or a family member. But not realizing that if you have that belief, you are then going to behave in ways that make this true, right? If I think friendships are inferior, I'm not going to spend as much time. I'm not going to try as much. I'm not going to be as vulnerable. I'm not going to make you feel special. All the things that you might do with a spouse. We don't realize that it's not because friendship is inherently inferior. It's because when we have that belief, we behave in ways that would make any relationship inferior, right?
My take from what you're saying is basically to be a good friend, you just have to show up. And I think a lot of us think that, we don't have to talk for 5 years. And I always hear this, we don't see each other for 5 years and we're still the best of friends. And I don't think that connection or that intimacy is necessarily as deep as it was when you guys were seeing each other every other day and when you were putting in the work. And I love what you said, that people think friendship is just supposed to be very easy, right? You don't have your moments of where you find it annoying, or you want to confront somebody because she said or he said something that offends you, but you don't know how to do it in a friendship. Whereas in a spouse or in an intimate relationship, you're so much more comfortable screaming and shouting at that person. Why is that? Why is it in friendships it's a bit more delicate? Is that a tell for something, or is it because, like you said, we don't get that intimate with our platonic relationships oftentimes?
Yeah, so you're right. I mean, the research definitely finds we're a lot less likely to bring up issues with our friendship, with our friends, compared to our romantic partners. And I think part of the reason is that friendship is so voluntary, right? So, you can kind of just choose one day to the next, your decision can change. And when you're married to someone, it's kind of like, well, you're going to be stuck in this, even if we have a difficult argument. And family, it's like, well, we have this blood connection no matter what. And so I think the fact that friendship is voluntary makes us afraid. We think if I try to address this problem, you can just abandon me then. And I think if we follow that assumption to the end, right, that I won't bring up this conflict because I think you'll abandon me and so that we can still be friends. What actually ends up happening when you don't bring up the conflict and it's something that matters to you is that you end up withdrawing. And then you guarantee that the friendship ends, rather than at least having the option, if you brought it up, that you could work on it and you could continue to maintain the friendship. So it's like, I'm afraid of being abandoned, so I ensure that this is going to end rather than giving it a chance at succeeding. I think the other issue is we don't know how to have conflict with friends. And that, we really don't. And this was the hardest thing for me. I was definitely a conflict avoider and suppressor, and realizing, I'm starting to withdraw from one of my closest friendships. So this avoidance isn't working. And I start reading these studies that find that, having open empathic conflict is linked to deeper intimacy. And people that have conflict in constructive ways, they're more popular, they're less lonely, less depressed. They're doing really well at friendship. So I realized, it's not about having conflict that disturbs the friendship. It's how you have conflict. And if you can do conflict in a way where you're not trying to win, where you're trying to make sure both people's parties' needs are getting met, where you're thinking about the other person's perspective and your own, where you're not yelling, you're not attacking, you're not blaming, you're saying, I felt hurt when this happened. What was going on for you at the time? What can we do moving forward? When it's an act of collaboration and reconciliation, in fact, we find that in having that conflict, we actually feel closer than if we didn't have that conflict at all.
I mean, I'll be honest, it's easier said than done, because especially when you're in your 20s and you're a bunch of girls and, something happens, you don't come to your friend and say, listen, I felt hurt when you did this. The first thing, I would do is talk to my other friends and say, like, well, this is what she did to me and I really hate it. And, you can't bring yourself to confront her because it's such an uncomfortable, awkward, thing that and your heart starts beating and you're like, I can't. I'm just non-confrontational, especially in the Asian culture where we don't like conflict. Americans are very head on, let's dish this out, we're gonna get it and then move on. Whereas Asians kind of like to build resentment and stew in it and not be so direct. Now I think I'm a bit better, but I do remember a time where I just mustered up the courage and told my friend, I said, why did you do this? This is how it made me feel, exactly what you said. And it was so uncomfortable, and it was nothing I've ever done before. But after that, I felt like our friendship was so much stronger because I was able to be vulnerable and tell her, you didn't make me feel good when you said that. It really hurt my feelings. And you talk about vulnerability in the book. Why is vulnerability such a key component in the whole relationship aspect of friendship?
Well, It's hard to accept that people really love you if you don't feel like they really know you. If you're not vulnerable, you can't trust that your friends actually care about you because you're like, I'm hiding this thing, and if you knew this thing, you might think differently about me. And so there's just a ceiling, a ceiling to how much intimacy and how much closeness you could have and how secure you can feel with someone if you're not actually vulnerable with them. Now, the scary part is vulnerability is a risk. There's a study from Dr. Michael Slepian. He studies secrets. He finds that, who's the best at bearing the weight of these secrets. And it's not something inherent to them that they're just like, I don't know, just psychologically superior to everyone else. It's that the people that were best at bearing the weight of their secrets, they had shared the secret with someone who responded positively. They internalized that, and they became really good at handling the weight of their secrets. But the complicating factor is the people that were worse at handling the weight of their secrets were people that had also shared it with someone and received a negative response. So that's why vulnerability is so risky.
Let's talk about jealousy and envy in friendships. This is something that nobody talks about. It's something that a taboo topic, right? In the Philippines or in Filipino, there's a saying called "Hindi nasusukat ang inggit," which means you can't measure envy. And so sometimes a lot of people's actions they don't realize it's because it's coming from a point of envy or jealousy, right? They don't realize it's motivated by that, as well as they don't admit it to themselves because in a way, it's a bit embarrassing, right? So if you and a bunch of your friends are at the same, let's say you all graduate university the same. One friend gets a job, another friend, maybe doesn't, and another friend has like a gap year. And then as you get older in your careers, there's one friend who's really climbing that ladder, and you can't help but feel that sort of envy or jealousy, like, oh, wait, I want that life. And coupled with social media, you see these things on Instagram and let's say TikTok and things like that. It's magnified. So as a friend, how do you navigate these feelings towards somebody who's supposed to be a good friend of yours, and you want to celebrate their successes, but you feel that way towards them?
Yeah, so I think a few different ways. First of all, I really like this theory called internal family systems, which is the idea that we have multiple selves inside of us, right? And so even if there is a self inside of you that's feeling jealous and envious, there might be another self inside of you that actually does feel very happy for your friend. And if you recognize those and you're able to kind of separate them out a little bit, you can say to your friend, I'm really happy for you, without it feeling fake or inauthentic, because you're like, well, there's a part of me that's really jealous, but there is a part of me that's really happy, and both of those can exist at the same time. I think if that doesn't feel possible for you, and it feels like the jealous part is just really, really strong, that you can say that. You can say, I've just been struggling because I've also been really looking to get this thing or to get this job too, but and that's why it's hard for me, but I really want to feel so happy for you right now. You can voice that. I think what ends up being harmful is when we try to pretend that we're not.
Which is what most people do, if not all.
Yeah, and it's a normal human emotion. Like, if someone has something that you want, then, jealousy is a normal human emotion. But I think sometimes when we pretend we're not jealous, what ends up happening is we just put people down. We act destructively to try to make ourselves feel better. We say, I'm sure you got that promotion you really wanted, but I'm not sure why they gave it to you. Or, we don't really respond when they're reaching out to us. And so it takes that self-awareness to be able to say, I'm jealous. That's okay. Do I have the capacity to be happy for them too? Is there a part of me that I can lean into? If not, could I just say, this is hard for me because I want this thing too, but I also really want to be happy and excited for you.
That to say that this is hard for me because I really want this too, that's vulnerability right there, right? Because in order for you to tell your friend that, you need to admit to yourself that this is something you're also aiming for. And a lot of people have a hard time doing that. But also, I think a lot of people are unaware. So exactly what you said, awareness. Saying that, okay, this is why am I feeling this way? And realizing that. I love the steps you gave. It's really beautiful. I got a question from my friend who loves your book, and she is actually a psychiatrist, and she recommends it to all her patients. And she says,
Thank you.
how do you navigate friendships when it evolves into different stages? Like when you're single and then you get married, and then married versus having kids. And you still want to remain friends with these people, but it's hard because you're at different stages of your life.
Yeah. I think when we go into different stages, we often develop a set of assumptions that this person's too busy, they don't want to hang out with me, they don't want to hear from me, right? And I think that can happen on both sides when one friend has a kid, one doesn't. They don't want to hear about my kid all the time.
Like, I don't want to see a photo of your kid. Yeah.
Yeah, versus, oh, they're so busy with their kid, they don't want to hear from me. And so these assumptions lead to us backing away from the friendship, but we never actually test them, right? We never actually say, like, what does your schedule look like? Do you have time to hang out? Given your circumstances have changed, what would it look like for us to spend time together? Like, what would work for you, right? Like, we don't actually ask those questions, and those assumptions can kind of destroy us because we're afraid of rejection. I also know, for my friends with kids, they can't hang out with me as much, but I think they also want to be invited.
Okay.
They don't want to just feel like you're excluding them. So I'll kind of say, I know you're totally busy with your kids, so no worries if this doesn't work out, but I just want to make sure you included. So I wanted to share, I'm doing this trip with some friends and you're welcome to come if it ends up working out. I'll say something like that instead of the assumption being they're too busy, so I won't even invite them, because I think that people end up feeling rejected. The other thing that I'll say is something I mentioned before, which is like, we go through different life stages, but then our lives overlap again, and then they separate again, and so if we think long term, right, that this is going to ebb right now because, we have different priorities, but that doesn't mean it won't flow later. And if we don't assume that because we're not as connected now, that doesn't mean that the friendship is over. Because if we make that assumption, we stop reaching out, and it's the self-fulfilling prophecy thing.
You talk about also loneliness, right? So how do you know when you're lonely?
So the difference between loneliness and solitude is that loneliness is when you don't have the social connection that you want. Solitude is you're happy with being alone. But the other thing about loneliness that's complicated is when you're lonely, let's think about this historically. You're separated from your tribe, you are in danger. And what that means is that when we're lonely, we tend to perceive the world differently. We're thinking, for example, lonely people, according to the research, they think they're being rejected when they're not. They report liking humanity less, having less compassion for others. When you interact with a lonely person, they like you less. And lonely people tend to be more hostile toward other people, report enjoying times of connection less. You can deduce that you're lonely, not just from that feeling of I feel like I don't have the connection that I want, but also, am I being very cynical in my interpretation of my relationships? For me, it's am I in a bad mood and I don't know where this is coming from? I might be lonely. Am I thinking about this relationship and I'm thinking about all the ways they harmed me and I'm not acknowledging the larger context here? I might be lonely. Am I wanting to reach out to someone but I'm just thinking they're going to reject me? Those are all signs that even if you might not feel it yet, your thinking process and the ways that it's a lot more distrusting and cynical indicate that you might also be experiencing loneliness.
One of my key takeaways here is you need to be an extremely self-aware person. Because if you don't realize that this is how you're feeling and you can't self-assess, then you won't get to the conclusion that, okay, yes, I am lonely, or yes, I need to work on this friendship, right? And I don't think a lot of people do that inner work. They pose questions towards themselves. What a lot of people end up doing is pointing the blame on, saying, well, this person said this about me, or they didn't have time, or, they were rushing. And they don't look at the mirror is what I mean. So that's one of my key takeaways with everything that you're saying. And I think self-awareness is so underrated to this day and age. We tend to look at everyone else except ourselves. What are the tips into saving a friendship? I'll give you an example. I have a best friend. I felt like we drifted apart over the years because we had different stages. We went to different universities. We had different likes growing up, but she was still one of my best friends in high school. And now we're in our careers and we have had different interests, but I still consider her one of my best friends. And I want to reignite that bond, or let's say save that friendship, right? What are the steps I need to take in order for me to to save that friendship? Like, how do I know I'm not being annoying and saying, hey, do you want to hang out here? Do you want to have dinner here? What are the social cues that I need to also, I don't know, be aware of?
Yeah. So I guess first I would ask, have you drifted because of like life circumstances, or is there sometimes in friendship we don't make the unsaid said, and so there's all this unsaid stuff between us that's kind of pushing us away, but nobody has actually addressed it, and so that's why things start feeling weird. Do we need to address some of the reasons, or maybe it's just because of the circumstance? So if that's the case, just saying, I love you, you're so important to me, I noticed we haven't been interacting as much, and I just want to have a conversation to see if there's anything that we need to talk about to work through that, because I'm really invested in this friendship. So being able to have that conversation if you need. If not, I always lean towards assuming that people like you. So if it's ambiguous and you're like, I'm not sure, is she as invested? Like, the first assumption being that, oh, she is, this is like, she wants to hear from me. And so reaching out, finding some time to connect again, talking, reminiscing is a really powerful force. Like you said before, like it's related to more closeness and more positive feelings. So spending that time together, reminiscing, being vulnerable, sharing affection, telling this friend how much they mean to you. Those are all things that really feed our friendships.
I love that. It's true that sometimes we don't make that effort to tell somebody how much they mean to us, especially friends is what I mean, because you'll tell that to somebody who you're intimate with, but not necessarily a friend. Everything's kind of always like a shallow, superficial, let's laugh this out. But when it's time to get deep, you feel that kind of awkwardness in a way, like you're not willing to say, I miss you, I really want to spend time with you. You kind of are like, oh, maybe I'm not that important, so I'm just gonna play the same game. It's funny. So you describe authenticity as a state of internal honesty. Why do you think authenticity is important in making and keeping friends?
So in the book, I differentiate between authenticity versus rawness. And so, like taking your case with your friend, right? Like, it's a lot easier to just be like, I'm gonna pull away and, I'm gonna play it cool and I'm gonna be chill, right? And sometimes that might be the response that comes to us more reflexively. It might be our raw response, the first thing we want to do. But it's actually the reflexive response often isn't the authentic response, because our reflex is to protect the authentic response, because it makes us feel exposed, it makes us feel vulnerable. And so if the authentic thing is, I miss you, I love you, I know we haven't talked in a while, but I'm so invested in this friendship with you. Often when we try to protect that vulnerable, authentic piece of us, protection comes out in ways that can harm the friendship. Like we've talked about with jealousy, right? Instead of me saying, I want to be happy for you, but I'm a bit jealous and I'm struggling. Instead, we say, it's not that great that you got this thing. Or when you want to say, that kind of hurt me and I'd love to talk about it. Instead, we kind of just pull away from the other person, right? There's this way where when we don't tune into our authenticity, we don't tune into our vulnerability, we protect ourselves from it at the cost of our relationships. And so that's why it's really important to be authentic, because it means we can both be ourselves and maintain closeness with this other person. Whereas when we're inauthentic, it's like we're not ourselves and we're not maintaining our closeness, but we do feel like we're more protected or less exposed. If you're always protecting yourself, in the long term, it could be a form of self-harm, right? Because I'm not being vulnerable, I'm not affirming other people, I'm not reaching out. That makes me feel protected, I'm less exposed. But in the long term, now I'm lonely. And that is one of the most vulnerable places that I can leave myself in, given all of the benefits of social connection for us.
Okay, thank you so much, Marisa Franco, Platonic. Do you want to tell our audience where to get a copy of your book?
Sure, yeah. So my book, Platonic, How the Science of Attachment Can Help You Make and Keep Friends, should be available wherever books are sold. Bookshop, Amazon, hopefully your local bookstore. If they don't have it, they can order it for you. Thank you so much for your time,
Thank you so much. I highly suggest you grab a copy of this book and, you know what, give it to a friend that you want to connect with, or it's a great gift, or just read it. It's so insightful and it'll teach you so many things about yourself and the relationships you want to have.